At 38, I sat at the head of a boardroom table I technically already owned and watched my brothers stand up and try to end my career with 4 words. "She's pregnant. She can't." He said it with a smirk, the kind you practice in bathroom mirrors, the kind that assumes it's already over for you. He didn't know I'd spent the last 6 months quietly, methodically, building the case that would end his. My name is Maya Osei. I am the founder and, as of last Saturday morning, the majority shareholder of Crestline Capital, a financial services firm with 4 regional offices, 200 employees, and $340 million in assets under management. I am also a woman who grew up in the same house as the man who just tried to use my pregnancy against me in front of a boardroom of senior executives. And I am the person who had a folder on that table with his name on it. 19 months of his decisions, documented, verified, and ready to be read aloud. He thought he was handing the board a reason to pass me over. He was handing me the room. Welcome to Calm Drama Stories, where ordinary people set quiet boundaries that change everything. Here, dignity always outlasts cruelty, and the truth has a way of arriving exactly when it's supposed to. Drop a comment, hit subscribe, and stay close. This one takes a minute to build, but I promise every minute is worth it. Let me take you back, before the boardroom, before the folder, before any of this. Let me take you to a Sunday afternoon in Atlanta sometime in the early 1990s in a house on Greenbrier Road with a front porch and a yard that needed mowing and the smell of my mother's cooking coming through every window. My father, Bernard Osei, worked 6 days a week. He had grown up in Kumasi, Ghana, come to the United States at 22 with 2 suitcases and a mathematics degree, and spent the next decade learning American finance from the inside out. He started at a commercial bank as a loan processor. He became a loan officer, then a branch manager. Then, in 1989, he opened his own office. 1 desk, 1 phone, 1 commercial loan product, his name on the door. By the time I was 10 years old, that office had become 3. By the time I was in high school, it had become a regional firm with a full staff and a reputation in the Atlanta business community that made people take his calls on the first ring. He named it Crestline Capital because he said you could always see more from the top of a hill than from the bottom of a valley. He said that to us more times than I can count, always more from the top. My brother, Marcus, is 4 years older than me. He is broad-shouldered, confident, the kind of man who fills a room when he walks into it. He has my father's laugh, loud, easy, the kind that makes strangers feel like old friends, and my father's handshake, and my father's habit of remembering every person's name after one introduction. People liked Marcus immediately. They always had. He started working at Crestline the summer after his sophomore year of college. He was 19. He mostly answered phones and filed documents, but he learned fast, and by the time he graduated, he had a title and a salary and a desk near my father's office. He came home for holidays talking about deals and clients and industry trends, and my father would lean back in his chair and listen and nod with this expression I recognized even as a teenager: pride. My father was proud of Marcus in that easy, uncomplicated way some fathers are proud of firstborn sons. I was 13 when I watched all of this begin. I was also the one who stayed late doing homework at the kitchen table while Marcus was at the firm. The one who read the annual reports my father left lying around the house like other people left magazines. The one who asked, at 16, if I could spend a Saturday going through Crestline's Q3 balance sheet because something in the numbers seemed off to me, and I wanted to understand why. My father looked at me for a long moment when I asked that. Then he slid the report across the table and said, "Tell me what you see." I was right. There was a rounding error in one of the subsidiary accounts that had been propagating for 2 quarters, small enough that no one had caught it, large enough that it would have created a discrepancy in the year-end audit. My father called his accountant that Monday. He never told Marcus about the conversation at the kitchen table. I didn't understand that at the time. I do now. Our mother, Gloria, is a woman of extraordinary patience and strategic blindness. She cooked, she organized, she kept the family in motion. She adored both of her children with equal ferocity and refused to acknowledge on any level that we had been shaped differently by the same household. She hosted Sunday dinners every week, still does. The table was always full. Relatives, family friends, neighbors, the pastor from their church, whoever was in need of a plate. She cooked jollof rice and fried plantains and stewed chicken and kelewele with ground nuts, and she believed with genuine conviction that most problems could be solved if the people involved would just sit down and eat. She was wrong about some things. She was right about the food. Marcus and I were not close the way some siblings are close. We were not enemies either. We were something more complicated. Two people who had grown up in the same house, gone to the same dinners, heard the same stories, and understood completely different things about what they meant. He understood that he was first. I understood that first wasn't the same as best. And for a long time, I kept that understanding quiet, because in our family, in our community, in the particular world our father had built, Marcus's version of things was the one that got reinforced. He was the one who had come to the firm first. He was the one who had stood beside our father at ribbon cuttings and charity golf tournaments and Chamber of Commerce luncheons. He was the face people saw when they thought of Crestline Capital. I was the one in the background, running the numbers, building the models, finding the errors before they became problems. I was fine with that. For a long time, I was genuinely fine. And then our father got sick. My father was diagnosed with a rare form of kidney disease when I was 29. He was 64. He had been healthy his entire life, still walked 3 miles a day, still came into the office 5 days a week, still remembered every client's birthday and called them personally. The diagnosis came on a Thursday. By the following Tuesday, he had already met with the estate lawyers. Bernard Osai was a man who understood that preparation was not pessimism. He had built Crestline from nothing precisely because he never assumed good outcomes. He planned for every contingency, he modeled every scenario. He left nothing to chance if he could help it. The estate planning process took 4 months. I was not in most of those meetings. Marcus was. He flew in for 3 separate sessions, sat with my father and the attorneys, reviewed documents, gave input on structure. I was in Charlottesville finishing my MBA. When I came home for Thanksgiving that year, my father sat me down in his study, a quiet room with dark wood shelves and a leather chair he'd bought when he signed his first major client, and he walked me through the plan. 40% to Marcus, 40% to me, 20% to an independent board of trustees, bound by a governance charter he had written himself. And then he told me about the clause. He said it quietly, the way he said important things, not dramatically, just clearly. There is a governance trigger in the estate documents, he told me. If the board votes to restructure executive leadership, moving from a co-leadership model to a single CEO, and that CEO is you, your stake converts to 51%, majority control. He looked at me steadily. I asked him why. He was quiet for a moment, then he said, "Because Marcus will always believe he should be first, and you will always be patient enough to let him think he is, until the day the company needs you to stop being patient." He said, "I am not doing this to punish your brother. I am doing this because I have watched you both for 30 years, and I know which one of you built what I built." I didn't know what to say. He said, "Don't tell him about this clause, not yet. There's nothing to tell until there's a reason." Then he asked how school was going, and we never spoke about it again. He died 14 months later, a quiet Tuesday evening in February, in a hospital room with a view of the city, with my mother holding one hand and Marcus holding the other. I was on a plane. I landed 40 minutes too late. The grief of that is its own story. I don't have the words for it tonight. What I can tell you is this. I sat in the back of the car from the airport to the hospital with my eyes open and felt something that was bigger than crying and had no name. My father had seen something in me that I was still becoming, and now he was gone, and I had to become it without him watching. Marcus became co-head of operations the week after the funeral. The title had been his in practice for years. Making it official was a formality. I became director of finance. I moved back to Atlanta. I took the office 2 doors down from the one that used to be my father's, and I put the estate documents, all of them, including the governance charter with the clause, in the bottom drawer of my filing cabinet. And I went to work. What I am about to tell you is not a list of grievances. I want to be careful about that. I spent years resisting the temptation to keep a ledger, because ledgers become identities, and I didn't want my identity to be someone who spent her life tracking injustice. But there are facts, and facts are not grievances. Fact: in the first 3 years after our father died, Marcus approved 14 vendor contracts without routing them through financial review. 4 of those contracts created cost overruns that took 2 quarters to clean up. I cleaned them up. Fact: in year 4, he reorganized the Southeast Regional Office without notifying the board. He called it a structural improvement. The board called it a breach of the governance charter. He called it a misunderstanding and submitted a retroactive report. I wrote the remediation memo. Fact: in year 6, he hired a man named Derek Calloway as head of IT. Derek was Marcus's college roommate. Derek listed on his resume a computer science degree from Georgia Tech. Georgia Tech had no record of Derek Calloway graduating. I found this during a routine HR audit. I brought it to Marcus directly, privately, giving him the opportunity to address it before it became a board matter. He told me I was being paranoid. He told me Derek was brilliant and loyal, and that formal credentials were less important than demonstrated ability. He told me, with a smile that was meant to be charming and landed somewhere south of it, that I worried too much. That was always his answer. You worry too much, Maya. I had been worrying about the right things for 8 years. Fact: in year 9, 2 of our regional managers, both women, both excellent, both brought in under my recommendations, submitted formal transfer requests rather than continue reporting to Marcus. The requests cited management style incompatibility. Both requests were granted. Both managers transferred to offices outside his direct chain of command and performed exceptionally. I have their performance reviews. I want to pause here and tell you something important. I never went to the board with any of this. Not once. Every time I found a problem, I fixed it quietly, documented it completely, and said nothing beyond what was absolutely necessary. People have asked me why. The honest answer is because I loved my brother. Because I believed somewhere underneath the entitlement and the carelessness and the easy assumption of authority, there was still the person who taught me to ride a bike in the Greenbrier Road driveway and drove me to my SAT exam at 7 in the morning and cried at our father's funeral with his whole body shaking, unable to stop. I kept thinking he would figure it out. I kept thinking the day would come when he would look at what we'd been building and understand that partnership meant both people had to carry weight. That day never came. What came instead was year 11 and a board-initiated governance review and a woman named Patricia Chen asking me for coffee on a Saturday morning. Patricia Chen has been on the Crustline board for 9 years. She is 67 years old, Chinese-American, a former federal bank examiner who moved into private sector governance consulting after 20 years of regulatory work. She is 5'4", always impeccably dressed, and carries the particular stillness of a person who has spent decades watching people reveal themselves in high-stakes rooms. She called me on a Wednesday. She said,
I'd like to meet before the board session next month, Saturday morning, before the office opens, just the two of us. I said, of course. I knew what the governance review was about. The board had commissioned it 6 months earlier after our second consecutive quarter of operational cost overruns, both of which traced back to decisions Marcus made without financial review. The review was being conducted by an outside consultant named Gerald Park, who had the manner of a man who had seen every variety of corporate dysfunction and been surprised by none of it. Gerald had asked both of us for documentation, complete access to decision records, budget approvals, board communications, HR files. I gave him everything, every file, every record, every memo, indexed and organized.
Marcus gave him a curated selection. I know this because Gerald, to his considerable credit, told me. He said it as a statement of fact, without editorial comment. The documentation you provided was comprehensive. The documentation from the other side had gaps. Gaps, the word of someone being diplomatic. So I knew Patricia's Saturday meeting was not casual, and I had a feeling, not certainty, just a feeling, the kind that comes from watching a room carefully for a long time, about where it was heading. I drove to the office at 7:30 in the morning. The building was quiet in the way downtown Atlanta is quiet on a weekend. Not empty, just unhurried. I parked in the garage, took the elevator to the 4th floor, and found Patricia already there, 2 coffees on the table in the small conference room, her reading glasses pushed up on her head. She didn't waste time on pleasantries. She slid the governance proposal across the table. I read it carefully. It took about 4 minutes. The room was quiet enough that I could hear the air conditioning hum. When I looked up, Patricia said, "The board believes co-leadership is no longer sustainable at Crestline. The governance review documented a pattern of unilateral decision-making and insufficient financial oversight that has created consistent risk exposure. We are recommending a restructure to a single CEO model." She paused. "The board's recommendation is you." I kept my face still. I had practiced keeping my face still for 8 years, and I was grateful for every moment of that practice right now. She walked me through the findings: 4 budget overruns, 3 liability-creating contracts, the Derek Calloway credential issue, which had now been formally investigated and confirmed, the regional manager transfer requests, a total of 19 documented instances where Marcus had made executive-level decisions outside his authority or without required notification. 19 months of decisions, the same number I had in my folder. Gerald had been thorough. Then Patricia said, "There is one more thing." She slid a second document across the table. I recognized the header immediately: Osei Family Trust, dated 2012, my father's estate. The governance trigger clause. I read it carefully, though I had read it before. The language was precise. In the event of a board-approved restructure from co-leadership to single CEO governance, and if that CEO is a direct descendant of the founding principal holding no less than 40% equity, the named executive's stake shall convert to 51%, granting majority control of the corporate entity. My father, the man who modeled every scenario. Patricia sat a share transfer agreement beside the trust document, already prepared, dated that Saturday. I looked at her. She looked at me. I picked up the pen. I signed the agreement at 8:14 a.m. The board meeting was scheduled for the following Thursday at 10. I drove home in the quiet of a Saturday morning with the radio off and the city moving past my windows, and I thought about my father in his study, looking me steadily and saying, "I know which one of you built what I built. I had been building it for 11 years, and I told no one." If you have ever been in possession of a truth that changes everything, you know what it feels like to carry it through ordinary days. Every conversation becomes a kind of performance. Every meeting has a subtext that only you can hear. That week was the strangest of my life.
Monday morning, I ran our weekly finance team sync. 12 people in the large conference room, laptops open, coffee cups, the usual rhythm of a Monday at a financial services firm. I went through Q1 projections, flagged 2 items for follow-up, assigned action items, and ended the meeting in 42 minutes. Afterward, my deputy director, a young man named James, who had been with me for 3 years and was the sharpest financial analyst I had ever worked with, stopped me in the hallway. He said, "You seem different today." I said, "I got good sleep this weekend." He nodded slowly, the way people nod when they don't believe you but are too polite to say so.
Tuesday, Marcus invited me to lunch. This was not unusual. We had lunch together 4 or 5 times a month, usually at the Italian place 2 blocks from the office, usually talking about operations and finances and the particular small frictions that accumulated between our 2 departments. He was warm. He was expansive. He ordered the ribeye and talked about a golf trip he was planning in May. Pinehurst, a group of his college friends, 4 days of courses and evenings at the clubhouse. He asked if David and I were doing anything for spring. I said we hadn't planned anything yet. He talked about the Crestline expansion he'd been thinking about, a 5th regional office in Charlotte, which he believed was underserved in our market segment. He was animated about it, leaning forward, the way he got when an idea was running fast inside him. He said he'd been talking to a real estate contact up there, had seen 3 potential properties, thought we should move by Q3. I listened. I asked questions. I ate my pasta. I did not tell him that the governance review had recommended the Charlotte expansion be evaluated only after the leadership restructure was resolved, a note that was in the report he had received, a report he had apparently not finished reading. I did not tell him about Saturday. I paid for lunch. He didn't notice. Wednesday evening, my phone rang while I was sitting on our back porch with David. David is the most emotionally intelligent person I have ever met. He's a high school history teacher who reads everything, listens to everyone, and has the rare ability to say the exact right thing at the exact right moment without making it feel like a strategy. He's also, notably, the only person outside Patricia and the board attorneys who knew about Saturday's meeting. He had said when I came home that weekend and showed him the signed agreement, "Maya." He paused. And then, "Your dad knew exactly what he was doing." "Yes," I said. "He did." David took my hand and we sat with that for a while. Wednesday evening, on the back porch, my phone rang. Renata. Renata Boateng is my closest friend. We have known each other since graduate school. She's a corporate attorney. Brilliant, fiercely loyal, and honest in the particular way that only very close friends can be honest, which is to say she tells you things you don't want to hear with a tone that makes it bearable. She said, "How are you feeling about Thursday?" I said, "Good, honestly good." She said, "Are you going to tell them about the baby?" I said, "No, that's mine. The meeting isn't about that." There was a pause. I recognized that pause. I had known Renata for 11 years. That pause meant she had something to tell me and was figuring out how. She said, "Marcus knows." I went cold. The porch, the evening air, the glass of water in my hand, all of it went sharp and distant at once. She told me quickly. Her husband, Kwame, ran in overlapping social circles with Marcus's college friends. There had been a dinner party the previous Saturday, the same Saturday I had been signing documents at 8:14 in the morning. Someone at that dinner, she didn't know who, had apparently mentioned my pregnancy. They had found out through a mutual contact, she thought, but she wasn't certain. What she was certain was what happened next. She said, "Maya." Her words here were careful, deliberate, the voice of a lawyer choosing precision. Marcus spent most of that dinner figuring out how to use it. She'd heard this secondhand through Kwame, who had heard it from someone else at the table. She couldn't verify the exact words, but the message was consistent. Marcus was planning to bring my pregnancy up at the board meeting as a reason to reconsider the leadership restructure. She said, "I'm so sorry I didn't call sooner. I only heard about it yesterday." I told her not to apologize. I told her I was glad she called. I sat on the porch for a long time after we hung up. David came out and sat beside me.
He didn't ask. He just sat. After a while, I said, "He knows about the baby. He's going to use it tomorrow." David was quiet. I said, "I could call Patricia tonight. I could have him removed from the meeting." David looked at me carefully. "What do you want to do?"
I thought about my father. I thought about the way he spoke about my brother in that study, with love and sorrow in equal measure. Love for the person Marcus was, sorrow for the person Marcus had decided to be. I thought about 19 months of documents in a folder. I thought about 2 regional managers who had requested transfers, and an IT director who had lied about his degree, and 4 budget overruns, and 3 liability-creating contracts. I thought about a man who learned about his sister's pregnancy at a dinner party, and spent the evening calculating how to weaponize it. I said, "I want them to hear him say it." David nodded. He poured me a glass of water, and we sat outside until the sky went dark. I slept well that night, deeply, without dreaming, the sleep of someone who has done everything they can and is ready for what comes next. Thursday. I was at the office by 8:15. I am always early. This is not anxiety, it is preference. I like the building before other people arrive. I like the quiet of an office before the day fills it up. I like being able to think without the sound of other people's thinking all around me. I went to my office, set my bag down, made coffee. I sat at my desk and opened my laptop and did 30 minutes of ordinary work, reviewed 2 reports, responded to 4 emails, signed off on a quarterly compliance document. At 9:15, I opened the bottom drawer of my filing cabinet. The folder was exactly where I had left it. Manila, labeled in my handwriting, the tab reading simply, "Governance Review, Supporting Documentation." I had assembled it over the previous 6 weeks, after Patricia's Saturday. Not in anticipation of using it publicly, I had hoped, genuinely, that the board's findings would be enough, that the process would resolve cleanly without me having to put anything on a table. But I had prepared it, because preparation was not pessimism, because my father had taught me that. I carried the folder to the boardroom at 9:50. The room was on the 12th floor, the top floor of the building. My father had insisted on it when they moved offices in 2003. He said, "You can always see more from the top of a hill." The conference table was dark walnut, long enough for 12 but set for 8. The chairs were the kind that cost more than I made in my first year of working. The window faced northeast, and on a clear morning, which this was, you could see a wide arc of the Atlanta skyline. I set my folder at the place I always sat, second from the far end, left side. Not the head of the table, that was where the board chair sat. I sat down, I folded my hands, I waited. Patricia arrived at 9:05 with Gerald at her side. 3 other trustees followed, Robert Mensa, an Atlanta attorney who had known my father for 30 years, Catherine Vance, a former CFO who had joined the board 4 years ago, and a newer member named Howard Park, no relation to Gerald, who ran a regional investment fund. Marcus arrived at 9:58. He came in talking. That was Marcus. He was always mid-sentence when he walked through a door, always generating energy, always filling space before he'd fully occupied it. He was wearing the suit he wore to important meetings, dark charcoal, white shirt, a burgundy tie I recognized as one our mother had given him 2 birthdays ago. He looked good. He looked confident. He looked like a man who was about to receive something he believed was already his. He glanced at me when he sat down. I looked back at him steadily. He smiled. Easy, practiced. I did not smile back. Patricia called the meeting to order at 10:02. Gerald's presentation took 17 minutes. He was thorough. He was precise. He walked through the governance review methodology, the documentation scope, the findings framework. He used slides. Clean, factual, no editorializing.
Each slide was a category of findings. Each finding had a date, a description, a documentation reference number. The room was quiet in that particular way rooms go quiet when the information being presented is serious, and everyone in the room knows it. Marcus was composed. He had his notepad open, his pen moving occasionally, his posture the practiced relaxation of a man performing calm. I watched him the whole time Gerald spoke. I have always been a better reader of my brother than he knows. I watched his jaw tighten slightly at slide 6, the budget overruns itemized. I watched his eyes move to the windows briefly at slide 9, the regional manager transfer requests, with excerpts from the written statements. I watched his hand go still at slide 12, the Derek Calloway credential summary.
But he held it. He did not react visibly. He kept the performance of composure going all the way through. Patricia thanked Gerald. She summarized the board's position in 4 sentences, the way Patricia always communicated: clear, economical, no wasted words. The board had found a pattern. The board believed co-leadership was no longer the appropriate structure. The board was recommending a transition to single CEO governance. The board's recommendation was Maya Osei. She said, "We'd like to hear from both of you before we proceed to a formal vote." She looked at Marcus. He nodded. He straightened his notepad. He stood up. He spoke for 8 minutes. I will give Marcus this. He was good. He has always been good in rooms. He talked about Crestline's growth trajectory under co-leadership. He talked about client relationships he had personally cultivated. He named 3 major accounts he had brought in. He talked about our father's vision and the importance of operational continuity during a period of market uncertainty. He was warm. He was persuasive. He was the version of himself that had charmed every room he'd ever walked into. And then he set down his water glass. He looked at the board. He said, "Before we proceed to a vote, I believe the board should have the full picture. There is a personal circumstance affecting my sister that I think is directly relevant to this decision." He looked at me. I looked back. I kept my face completely still. He said, "Maya is pregnant. She's 11 weeks along. I want to be clear that I say this with concern, not criticism. This is a high-pressure role during a critical growth period for the company, and I think we have an obligation to honestly assess whether this is the right timing for a leadership transition of this scale." He said it well. That was the worst part. He said it in the language of concern. He wrapped the knife in silk. He sat down. The room was completely silent. Patricia looked at me. Gerald's pen had stopped moving. Catherine Vance, to her credit, had an expression that I can only describe as the face of a woman who has spent 30 years in corporate boardrooms and has just watched someone commit a career-ending error in slow motion. I took one breath in through my nose. I stood up. "Thank you, Marcus." My voice was even, unhurried, the voice I used in client presentations, in board reviews, in the rooms where I had spent 8 years learning to speak so that people listened. "You're right that I'm pregnant. 14 weeks, actually. You had the wrong number. And you're right that this role carries significant pressure. I'd like to address those 2 facts in the order of their relevance to this meeting, which is to say, this one first, and the pregnancy not at all." I opened the folder. I set the first document on the table. The governance documentation Patricia's team compiled, which is the same documentation Gerald has just presented, references 4 instances of budget authority being exceeded without board notification. I have here the original budget approvals from those 4 instances, with my financial review flags attached. Each flag was sent to Marcus directly. None received a response. I set the second document on the table. I have here the 3 vendor contracts that Gerald's report identifies as creating liability exposure. Each contract was routed to me before signing. Each was approved by Marcus after I returned it with a not recommended notation. The contracts were executed anyway. These are the approval signatures.
Third document. I have the formal HR transfer requests from both regional managers, not summaries, the original documents, in their words. I'm not going to read them aloud because the people who wrote them deserve their privacy, but they are here if the board wants to review them. Fourth document. And this. I slid the last paper forward. Slow, deliberate. A certified copy of the share transfer agreement I executed 6 days ago, in accordance with the governance trigger clause in the Osei Family Trust, a clause that was included in the estate filings in 2012, a clause that Marcus was copied on at the time of filing.
I looked at him. He had gone completely still. The performance of composure had stopped. He was just still. As of last Saturday, I hold 51% of Crestline Capital. I paused. I let that land. Which means the vote today is not about whether the board recommends me for this role. My voice stayed even, quiet, the kind of quiet that makes people lean in. It's about the terms under which we're going to discuss my brother's advisory position. The room held its breath. Patricia Chen had the expression of a woman who has been in difficult rooms for 40 years and recognizes a turning point when she sees one. She looked at Marcus. She looked at me. Something small moved in the corner of her eyes that might have been, in another context, a smile. Marcus's mouth opened. He said, "You..." He stopped. He tried again. "You went behind my back." I said, "I followed the governance documents our father wrote, the same documents you were copied on 12 years ago, the same documents that have been in the estate filing this entire time." He said, "Dad would not have wanted..." I said, "Dad wanted exactly this. He designed it this way. The clause doesn't activate unless the board determines it's necessary. The board determined it's necessary. He trusted them to make that call." He said nothing else. I sat down. I folded my hands on the table. I waited. What followed was procedural, and I'm going to tell you the shape of it rather than every word, because some of what was said in that room belongs to the people who were in it. The board voted. 6 votes, formally cast. The governance restructure passed. My appointment as CEO was confirmed. Marcus's transition to an advisory seat, non-operational, quarterly attendance, no executive authority, no signatory rights, was documented and proposed. Gerald took notes the entire time. His handwriting, I noticed at some point, was exceptionally precise. Marcus made 3 statements during those 40 minutes. The first, "This isn't over." The second, "Dad would never have wanted this." The third, near the end, quietly to no one in particular, "I was just trying to protect the company." He was not talking about the company. He was talking about himself. He had been protecting himself for 11 years and calling it leadership. He had been making unilateral decisions and calling that efficiency. He had been filling rooms with his presence and calling that the same thing as filling them with his work. I did not respond to any of it, not one syllable. When the meeting ended at 11:47, Patricia shook my hand. Gerald said, "Well done." Catherine Vance said nothing, but she squeezed my arm briefly as she walked past. Howard Park, the newest trustee, caught my eye near the door and gave me a nod that said everything his face was too professional to show. Marcus walked out without speaking to me. I stood at the window for a few minutes after everyone was gone. The Atlanta skyline, sharp in the morning light. The city my father arrived in at 22 with 2 suitcases, building something from nothing, trusting it to the right person when the time came. I thought, "I see you, Dad." I gathered my folder, my pen, my coffee cup. I took the elevator down. I went back to my office and returned 14 emails. My mother called at 6:30 that evening. Gloria, who cooked jollof rice and believed in communication, who had spent years trying to arrange her 2 children around the same Sunday table and call that harmony.
Her voice when she called was careful, measured, the voice of a woman who had already spoken to Marcus and was working very hard to stay neutral. She said, "Maya, what happened today?" I told her. Not the summary, the whole thing. I told her about Patricia's Saturday call, about the governance clause, about the signed agreement. I told her about the 19 months of documentation. I told her about Renata's Wednesday call and what Marcus had been planning. And then I told her what he said in that boardroom. There was a silence after that.
Long, the length of a woman processing something. Then she said, "He told you, in a boardroom." I said, "Yes." Another silence. She said, "He found out about his niece or nephew, and he used it in a boardroom?" I said, "Yes." She was quiet for another moment. When she spoke again, her voice was different. Not neutral, not measured. Her voice was the voice I had heard exactly twice before in my life. Once, when a neighbor had said something cruel about our father at a community event, and once, when Marcus had gotten into serious trouble in high school and lied about it to both of us. She said, "I'm going to call him. Don't you worry about what I say to him. I'll call him." She called him. I know the call lasted 46 minutes because she texted me when it ended. The text said, "He knows what he did. He knows I know. Call me tomorrow." I called her the next day. She sounded tired. She said, "Your father always said the hardest thing about loving someone is staying honest with them." I said, "I know." She said, "I should have been more honest with Marcus a long time ago." That was the truest thing she had said in 11 years. David had made dinner by the time I got off the phone. He set it on the table without ceremony. Rice and chicken, simple, the kind of meal you make when you want to take care of someone without making it a production. He poured 2 glasses of water. He said, "How do you feel?" I thought about it. I said, "Like someone who has been carrying something heavy for a long time and just set it down." He said, "Good." We ate dinner. We talked about ordinary things. His students, a book he was reading, the garden he was planning to start in the backyard. We did not talk about Crestline Capital for the rest of the evening. If you have ever watched the aftermath of a truth, you know it doesn't arrive all at once. It lands in stages. Some things shift immediately, some things take weeks, some things take longer than that. Here is what happened in the weeks after the board meeting. The 2 regional managers who had submitted transfer requests both rescinded them within the month. One of them, a woman named Danielle, who ran our Savannah office with the kind of quiet competence that I had always considered a model for the whole company, sent me an email that said simply, "We heard, we're glad." 4 words. I read them 3 times. Derek Calloway, Marcus's college roommate, the head of IT who had misrepresented his credentials, was let go in week 2, quietly, professionally, with a severance package that was generous and an NDA that was thorough. Gerald helped structure it. I was not present at the meeting. I did not need to be. The Charlotte expansion Marcus had talked about at our Tuesday lunch, the 5th regional office, the Q3 timeline, the real estate contacts, was placed on a 12-month evaluation hold pending the completion of the new leadership structure. When I eventually reviewed the preliminary numbers Marcus had run on the Charlotte opportunity, I found 3 significant errors in the financial modeling. I fixed them. I filed the corrected version. I assigned James to lead a proper feasibility study. James, when I gave him the assignment, looked at me for a moment with the expression he had been wearing since the Monday after the board meeting, a kind of careful, contained brightness, the face of someone who is very happy about something and is trying to be professional about it. He said, "Do you want me to start this week?" I said, "Yes." He said, "Okay." And then, quietly, "We're all really glad, Maya." I thanked him. I went back to my desk. I ran the numbers. Marcus came to his first quarterly advisory board meeting 8 weeks after the restructure.
He arrived on time, which I noted. He wore a suit, which I also noted. He sat in the chair designated for advisory members, not the head of the table, not the second seat, but third on the right side where the non-voting attendees sat. He had a notepad. He took notes. He spoke when addressed. He did not make any statements that were not responses to direct questions. I ran that meeting. I had run many meetings by that point. Internal ones, client ones, regulatory ones. But that one was different. Not because Marcus was in the room, because of the quality of the silence between us. Not hostile, not warm, something in between that I don't have a precise word for. Professional. We were, finally, purely professional. After the meeting, as people were filing out, he stopped beside me for a moment. He didn't look at me directly. He looked at the table. He said, "The Charlotte feasibility study, James is running it?" I said, "Yes." He said, "He's good." I said, "I know." There was a pause. He said, "I would have gotten there, eventually." I looked at him. I kept my face still. I said, "I know you believe that." He left. I stayed at the window for a moment. There it was. The thing about my brother that had always made this hard. He wasn't a bad person. He was a person who had been arranged by his life to believe certain things about himself, about his place, about what he was owed, and had never been given a reason to question them until now. Whether this became the reason, I didn't know. That was his work to do, not mine. My daughter was born on a Tuesday in August. 7 pounds, 2 ounces. Labor was 18 hours, and I will spare you every detail, except the last one, which is this. When they placed her in my arms for the first time, the first thing I thought, before joy, before exhaustion, before anything else, was, "You are going to hold the pencil." David cried. He had been trying to not cry and failed completely, which is one of the things I love most about him. We named her Naomi. We had discussed names for months. David had a list, I had a list. We had crossed off and added and argued gently about syllables and meanings and the way a name sounds when you say it across a dinner table for the next 20 years. We had not discussed naming her after my father, but I thought about it. I thought about it in those last weeks, lying awake at 2 a.m. while she moved inside me. I thought about Bernard Osei, the man with 2 suitcases and a mathematics degree, who had looked at his daughter at 16 and said, "Tell me what you see." Who had sat in a study and trusted a governance clause to the right person, who died before he could watch what happened next. In the end, I named her Naomi, which means pleasantness in Hebrew, and is also a woman in an old story who lost everything and rebuilt her life with the help of someone loyal enough to stay. David sent a photo from the hospital to the family group chat. Both grandmothers responded within seconds. My mother sent 7 messages in a row, all of them variations on joy, ending with, "She looks like Bernard. She has his eyes." Marcus responded 4 hours later. A single emoji. A small one. A heart. I stared at it for a while. I didn't reply, but I noticed. I took 6 weeks of leave. The company did not fall apart. James ran the finance team with precision. Patricia held the board steady. The Savannah office had its best quarter in 3 years. I came back on a Monday in October. James had organized a team breakfast. Nothing elaborate. Pastries and coffee in the conference room, the 12 people who reported to me. Someone had hung a small handwritten banner that said "Welcome back" in the looping handwriting of our admin coordinator, a young woman named Priya, who had worked with me for 2 years.
I stood in that room with a cup of coffee and looked at the people who had kept this going and felt something I can only describe as the specific warmth of having built something that works without you. My father would have understood that feeling. My first day back, between my 10 a.m. and my 11:30, I went to my office and opened the bottom drawer of the filing cabinet. The governance folder was still there. I took it out, I removed the documents, I filed them properly, each in the appropriate archive folder, each labeled, each retained in compliance with our 7-year document retention policy. Then I folded the empty manila folder and put it in the recycling bin under my desk. Some things you keep, some things you file, some things you let go of. Patricia Chen sent me a handwritten note the week I returned. Short, precise, her handwriting the careful cursive of a woman who learned it in a different era. It said, "Your father would have been proud. Not of the governance structure, he knew exactly what he was building when he wrote that clause. Proud of how you handled the room." I keep that note in my desk drawer. Top right, I see it when I reach for my stapler. Some mornings I take it out and read it. Most mornings I don't need to. The words have moved from the paper into my bones, the way important things do eventually. Marcus and I have not had a real conversation since the boardroom. I want to be honest about that. We coexist in the same family, the same company, the same city with the careful parallel of 2 roads that run close and do not intersect. He attends his quarterly advisory meetings. He is, by all observable measures, doing the work of a man recalibrating. I don't know what his private recalibration looks like. I don't have access to that. My mother continues to host Sunday dinners. I come when I can. Marcus comes most weeks. We sit at the same table and eat the same food and talk about neutral things, Naomi's latest developments, the weather, the news, things that belong to the surface of a family and not the underneath. Once, he looked at Naomi across the table. She was in her bouncer, awake, making the serious face infants make when they are processing the world, and he said, quietly, "She's beautiful, Maya." I said, "Thank you." We didn't say anything else about it. I am not waiting for an apology. I have made peace with the possibility that it may not come in the form I would recognize. Some people apologize with words, some people apologize by becoming something different. I am watching to see which kind Marcus is. I am not holding my breath. Crestline Capital ended the year 11% above our revenue target. The Charlotte feasibility study came back positive. We are opening the 5th regional office in Q2 next year. James has been promoted to Deputy CFO. Danielle in Savannah is being considered for a regional director role. The Derek Calloway IT situation, once resolved, led us to bring in a proper technology director, a woman named Sharon who had 15 years of financial services IT experience and 3 actual degrees. She has already identified 6 legacy systems that needed upgrading and built a technology modernization roadmap that I presented to the board last quarter. My father would have loved Sharon. My father would have loved all of it. I have thought about that boardroom many times since it happened. I have thought about my brother standing up with the practiced confidence of a man who was sure he had the room. I have thought about the 4 words, "She's pregnant, she can't," and the smirk that went with them, and the particular cruelty of a person who looks at a life being created inside you and decides that is a weakness to exploit. I have thought about what I would say to a younger version of myself, the one who sat at kitchen tables running numbers that her brother called worrying too much, who filed errors quietly and cleaned up messes without credit, who kept a governance clause in a bottom drawer for 8 years because her father had trusted her with it and she was not going to misuse that trust.
Here is what I would say. You are not being patient because you are weak. You are being patient because you are precise. There is a difference between waiting for the right moment and never acting. One is strategy. The other is silence disguised as peace. Know the difference. And this The people who mistake your quietness for absence, your caution for timidity, your steadiness for passivity, let them. Let them build their entire strategy on a misreading of you. There is no better position than being underestimated by someone who has had every advantage. The governance clause sat in a filing cabinet for 8 years. It never stopped being true. It just waited for the room to need it. You don't have to be the loudest person in the room to change what happens in it. You just have to be ready. My father built a corrective into the architecture because he understood that great institutions need protection from the assumptions of people who believe they have already won. He was right. I was just the one who finally used it. And my daughter, Naomi, with her serious face and her great-grandfather's eyes, she will grow up in a company where the person who holds the pencil is the person who has proven they know how to use it. That is what I built for her. That is what I built for him. That is what I built. That's my story. 7 years of documented patience, 1 boardroom, 4 words that changed the wrong room, and 1 folder that changed everything else. If someone has been waiting for you to fall apart, take this as your sign to sit still and let them wait. Let them say the whole thing. Let the room hear all of it. Then stand up. Drop a comment below. I read every single one. Hit subscribe if this story found you at the right time, and I will see you in the next one.